And on the docket tonight, some tough real-world questions about fantasy sports as to what amounts to an insider trading scandal, and it's rocking the industry. So we pose to the panel, how are fantasy sports exactly legal while traditional sports betting is not? And then guns, kids, and parents. When kids or challenged young adults become gunmen, are their parents responsible, and should they be? Should those parents face charges of their own when tragedy is not all too unforeseeable? And later, the Yukon mac and cheese kid, you cannot make this up. I'm going to ask our legal team to analyze the viral video from the perspective of the school, the parents, and yes, even the rude and crude mac and cheese kid. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. If you haven't seen that video, you have to. It's TV gold. Now, we begin tonight, though, with the growing legal questions surrounding the world of online fantasy sports. Now, the New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, he's now announced he's investigating FanDuel and DraftKings after some of their own employees apparently used inside information to win big at the expense of other players. Now, this as questions grow about the legality of fantasy sports overall. Now, a report comes from senior political correspondent Andrew Whitman.
DraftKings.com combines one-day fantasy sports with winning life-changing amounts of cash.
You've seen the ads promising the possibility of big bucks for outsmarting the fantasy football competition.
Just choose a league, pick your team, and get your cash winnings after Monday night.
But this morning, New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman launching a probe into the unregulated multi-billion-dollar industry, demanding daily fantasy sports sites DraftKings and FanDuel share internal information and policies for combating fraud. This after explosive revelations that an employee of DraftKings won $350,000 on the FanDuel site and may have posted inside information about his own site.
It's something we're taking a look at. Fraud is fraud.
The companies deny any wrongdoing, issuing a joint statement saying, quote, "Nothing is more important than the integrity of the games we offer."
We value openness and transparency, and it's the first time we've had anyone call into question in such a public fashion whether our games have integrity or not, and that's everything to us.
The sites have decided to temporarily block employees from participating in all online fantasy sports for money. But critics view these fantasy leagues are just excuses to bet on sports without any regulations.
How is it any different from sports betting? I don't see it. What, because you call it fantasy?
And I understand the question. Now, there's also some other issues at play as well. ESPN just announced it would end its fantasy sports segments, not altogether, but those that are sponsored by the fantasy sports companies, something other networks continue to do. Now, those segments would advise viewers of which players to bet on in their fantasy leagues, all with the fantasy company logos at the same time present right on the boob tube. Then there is the question that we hear from Frank Pallone, just posed to the New Jersey congressman. How can these sites be legal when sports betting is illegal and other online gaming is also against the law in most places? All right, let's bring in our panel to get into this and much more. Jimmy Kasuras. Jim's a criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens and New York City when he's not jumping across the pond. And
or
Doug Von
playing
Hoy.
fantasy sports.
Yeah, all right. Don't even get into Jimmy and fantasy. They usually go hand in hand. Doug Von Hoy, a founding partner of Carson Von Hoy, focusing on corporate misconduct, selected by the Legal 500 as one of the most influential trial lawyers in the nation. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at the law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC. He's also former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. Mark Furnish, back after an extended stay, who knows where, professor of Brooklyn Law, and he's argued before the highest court in the land. And yes, he likes to argue. All right, Jimmy, got a lot of people at home who play fantasy sports. It's a huge business, and it's a huge part of sports in terms of now when people watch, they want to be part of it. They'll pick players on respective teams, create their own teams. It's not just rooting for a team on Sunday, it's rooting for an individual player and his or her performance. To that end, a basic question here. How is it, let's just talk about what happened, what was alleged to have happened, and a few people are debating it. Folks working at these sites, they find out the trends that are going on, take that inside information, and go ahead and bet, not just bet, but win big at the expense of other people in the pool. How is not criminal? How is that not the equal definition of insider trading?
It absolutely is. It absolutely is. It's taking information that's not public, using that information in order to make a wager, and I mean a wager, before other people have the information. So it's clearly using inside information in the context of DraftKings. Wager is, to me, the important issue here. How this area avoided the Internet Gaming Regulation, the Enforcement Act, is a mystery to me. How this is not gambling.
Well, I'll get that in one second, but just DraftKings employees, they didn't bet on DraftKings. They went to an alternative site to FanDuel. Is that a distinction with a difference or not?
It's a distinction without a difference, because it resembles the securities fraud practice that we call front running. But the critical distinction is what Jimmy just alluded to. This is an entirely unregulated industry. Stock trading is heavily regulated, so you have knowledge theoretically that you're violating the law, and the laws in terms of stock fraud are very ambiguous, as we'll get into in other segments tonight. But they didn't get exempt from this by accident. When Congress passed the Uniform Internet Gambling Act around 2006, 2007, there's a categorical exemption for fantasy sports betting because it's considered a game of skill rather than chance. And Jimmy, who we all know is a very accomplished poker player, might complain that poker is considered a game of chance, not a game of skill.
That's what I'd like to get into. For people who don't know, and Andrew, who does the show with me regularly, he made the argument as well today. You're a poker player, okay? Talk about what happens if you want to play online poker and you want to gamble. If you want to do that, you got to go to some offshore Cayman account or whatever.
You can't
even do that anymore, right?
No, they've got it in
You have to
Jersey now,
live in
right?
New Jersey. Here's the point. There is a component of skill to poker, to horse racing. How is betting on a horse? You have these guys who research horses, where they were brought up, what they ate yesterday, how they're feeling, and so on and so forth.
Is he a mutter?
Right, and they make bets based on that information. How is that any different from looking at all of these players, looking at what their histories are, looking at who they're playing on a particular date? Does this guy do well against this team, and so on and so forth? There is really no difference.
So again, so I don't lose the audience right now. If somebody wants to play online poker,
they can't,
and they're not just doing it for entertainment, but they want to bet,
you
can't legally do it. But you can legally bet money on player X on the Bengals to get more than 100 yards receiving or whatever else. That's deemed skill, and poker's deemed chance.
That's right.
Okay.
Right, and the poker thing was extensively litigated in the federal courts here in Manhattan and the appeals court in the Second Circuit. And they, to the surprise of many observers, concluded that it was indeed a game of chance, notwithstanding that many of them are accomplished poker players. So the case went up to the Supreme Court, and they said, oh, the justices are going to take this case because it implicates their hobby. Nonsense, they shot it down.
Doug, they made this argument, what I'm about to say, so this isn't something that wasn't thought of at the time. You can't bet on a football game. I mean, you can. You can find your bookie, or you can go to Vegas and go to a sports book. But you can't at home tonight say, you know what, I'm going to bet on Thursday Night Football, I'm going to pick X over Y. But you can do this. Can you make a legal argument why there's a distinction with a difference, why you can bet on a game, but you can't bet on a player and a performance? You're still wagering here. Give me the argument.
See, I can't see a difference. Quite frankly, this question is starting to boil down to the very essence of whether you believe that people should gamble or not. And that's really what you're trying to find, a way that people can gamble without gambling. It's really a question about whether you believe gambling should be legal or not. And that's what really it's searching for.
Well, there's a fundamental distinction in gambling law between people who play, mere players, and people who make book. People who make book are punished much more severely, and the people who were allegedly misappropriating the information in this case, these are the people who, in part, were creating the algorithms, in essence, making the market. So they were functioning more like bookmakers than players who were traditionally not prosecuted.
And Mayo, you're the moral compass here at this table, as usual. So I come to you, and at the end...
What does he mean by that?
Yeah. I was hoping that flew over their heads. No, but... Listen, there's always been an argument, that's why we don't have pro teams in Vegas, that you don't want to create an environment around professional sports or college sports here where you're going to be messing with the integrity of the game here, where if you introduce that element to it, all of a sudden people are going to throw games. We've seen it certainly throughout. However, You open up a paper, there's a reason you get the injury report. There's a reason why there's a line as to who's favored and who isn't. Do you think it's time that we just acknowledge, like they do in Europe, right, and just say, it is what it is. Let's strip away the veil here and acknowledge it that that's why football does so well. It's so much money is riding on the games. The Super Bowl, that's why so many people watch it, for all of the different bets that you can make, from winning the coin toss to how long the national anthem's going to go for. Are we there, or do you think if we go there, we'll course in culture one more time, one time too many?
I think that really, when you look at it, it's really not much different than going and playing Lotto or Powerball or any of these other things, Mega Millions. And if you look recently, within the last few years at least, in Yonkers Raceway at the casino, you found that there was some insider activity where the people who were winning the sweepstakes were family members of the people who were running the casino. There's nothing new there. And even if you research, and technically I would imagine you do, the kids that play fantasy football for free know the stats. They can tell you how fast a wide receiver is, and they know all this, and they can tell you all the advantages, who does well against whom. But what they can't tell you is if someone's going to pull a hamstring in the second quarter. So that's a different issue. But it brings you back to the Black Sox, and it goes down toward integrity. But ultimately, gambling itself is really people deciding that they're going to take a chance on something. The thing that's most ironic is when I was in the DA's office, I remember specifically having detectives go into Joker poker shops and some of the cafes, okay, in Mount Vernon, as it happened to be. And the thing that always stayed with me was when we sent the detectives in with $50, they'd come back with 75. So I'm saying you couldn't do that. If you send them to Atlantic City, the money's gone. They're not going to come back with anything. So sometimes you got a better shot with the ones that are actually illegal.
Rich, the Brooklyn DA every year, right after the Super Bowl, arrests 100 people.
To make a point.
To make a point, the amount, you're never going to stop it. It is always going to happen. As you say, you advertise everything the bettors use to make their bets, but you don't let them bet.
So do you think it's better this way, where with a wink and a nod, we'll all play our office pools, and when the NCAA brackets come out, even though nobody knows who the heck Western Kentucky is or whatever else, you just like the numbers. Are we okay with the way it is, or do you think we just strip the veneer off it and say, we're doing it anyway, let's at least do it above book and tax?
Look, it's the same thing with legalizing drugs. You know, gambling can become an insidious disease. It can really ruin people. It can ruin families. I guess the question is, if you make it legal, are you going to make it easier for people to ruin themselves?
Yeah,
but you're not stopping
I got to hit a break here because I want to get to this next topic. This has been bugging me all week long here, obviously in the aftermath of what we saw with yet another shooting tragedy. But a finer point to it, a horrific case, yet again with a gun and a victim. This one out of Tennessee, but this one where one child, an 11-year-old, kills another, an 8-year-old, with his parent's weapon. But the question is, what should justice be, not for the child but also how about for the parents who left a loaded shotgun accessible for that child here? Is it time, not just civilly, but there's even some criminal exposure? We'll get into that after this.